Hello and welcome to TRIA Talks, where engaging conversations with fascinating people happen. I'm your host, Trina Hiscock. From changemakers to risk takers, entrepreneurs to artists, in this series of talks, I sit down for an informal one-on-one with some of the most inspiring individuals we meet and interact with every day on the TRIA life journey. We'll exchange ideas, unearth insights, and reveal interesting stories while sharing a few laughs along the way. We never know where the conversation will take us, but the journey is always worth it. Hello, everyone, and welcome to TRIA Talks. In this episode on Tuesday, March 9th, I am so honored to be sitting in conversation today with the wonderful Clarissa Ward. Please welcome Clarissa to the show. Thank you, Clarissa, for being here. It's so lovely to have you. Gosh, you know, we could go on and on about your bio. You are the Chief International Correspondent for CNN. You're known for your work as a conflict reporter. You have had a brilliant career that's taken a lot of work and a lot of different paths and journeys along the way, from Baghdad to Beirut, Beijing to Moscow. You've covered a lot of ground and a lot of miles, that's for sure. And you can read more about Clarissa's bio on our site, but also, you know, you are an award-winning journalist. Is it 5 Emmys you have?
I feel like I sound so obnoxious. It's actually 7. Because I just won 2 more, and yeah, but I recognize that sounds sort of annoying. So
no, it's not. You are well. That's very humble of you, and that's certainly something, a characteristic that I say about how humble and gracious you are. And I'm so grateful, as I said, to have you here with me today. I have read your book twice in print and listened to it on audio, and I have to tell you, listening to it on audio was so much more fun. Even though it was engaging in print, listening to you read it and speak the languages and hear the passion behind your voice, and also like hear you swear.
Actually, you're not the first person to have said that. A lot of people, you know, when they asked me to record the audio for the book, I was like, oh, okay. And you spend 4 days in this little booth just reading out the book, and it's exhausting and you get a sore throat. But people have really, really responded to it. I've had so many notes just saying, wow, I loved hearing you read it and you tell your stories. And I guess for people who follow my work at all, if you're used to hearing my voice anyway, then it's kind of a cool thing to be able to read it out.
Yeah, I mean, and that's certainly, I've been a fan of your work for a long time. And so for me, it's just like I would read it, listen to it out on my runs or my walks. And there were times, I kid you not, where I laughed out loud. And for someone that was, because, you know, while there are so many important messages and stories that you tell in the book, you are at times quite funny as well. So there's some humor in there.
Yeah, no, definitely. And I think that's one of the nicest things about writing this book was when you do the work that I do, obviously, you know, you see me on TV the whole time and it's like, you know, I'm very serious and rightly so. But there is this kind of whole other side of me. You know, I do think of myself as someone who really enjoys a laugh and who has a good sense of humor, and you definitely need that when you're in war zones to get through it. You need to have like that camaraderie and that lightness occasionally. And so having a place to kind of put some of that in the book and share it was really important to me.
Well, that's good. It really comes through for sure. And it's nice to see then all the characteristics of your personality as well shine through. It's interesting. This is the book here on all fronts that we're talking about. I know on the back here, Anderson Cooper says in his little snippet here, one of the things he said, which is kind of funny, is how did a continent-hopping Eloise, who was banished at 10 to a dismal British boarding school, wind up in Beijing as a stand-in for Uma Thurman on a Quentin Tarantino film, and then break into the news business and become one of the great foreign correspondents of our time? I think that is such a great snapshot of the book.
Yeah, it's definitely an unlikely journey. People are often like, how did you get into this? And I'm like, you know, it was an unusual path. It wasn't always written, you know, in the tea leaves, or it didn't appear that it was always going to be my destiny.
Right. So let's talk about the book then and how it came to be. Like, how did you know this was the right time to publish on All
So
Friends?
it's interesting. I had been asked to write a book back in 2012 by a friend of mine from college. We were at our 10-year reunion. I gave a speech about Syria, and she came up afterwards. She works for Penguin, and she was like, you really need to write a book. And I was like, that is the most petrifying thing I've ever heard. I cannot, literally, I would like have sweats, like anxiety sweats, thinking about writing a book and how difficult it would be, how much time it would take, what if people hated it, what if I'm a terrible writer, and so on and so on. I just, for some reason, I had a real mental block about it. I knew, as I always know, when you really fear something, it usually means you probably should do it, and put yourself out there a bit and make yourself a bit vulnerable and try something new and maybe fail at it and learn from that. But it wasn't until I was pregnant with my first son 3 years ago that I realized, oh, of course I have to write a book, and it's not about me or my ego or, you know, it's not about anything really, except my son needs to know who his mom is other than being mom, right? Because being mom is a very specific and kind of limiting role. And I want him to have a sense of the adventures I've had, the connections I've made, the places I've been to, the lessons I've learned, the horrors I've seen, ideally without him ever having to go there and see those things himself. Then when I started writing it, I realized that it's not actually just for my son. It's kind of a love letter to journalism in general, and a way to share with people all these beautiful moments that happen behind the camera that never make it onto the evening news.
And there are so many moments. I'm not kidding you. It's going to be hard for me to get through all the questions, you know, that I have for you. But the book it's so beautifully written, and the stories are told so with such passion and also like in such descriptive detail. Did you write in a journal all these years, or was that all from memory? Because they're quite descriptive.
Yeah. It's really funny you should say that, because I always knew I should keep a journal, and yet it's like a mental block for me. It's like going to the gym. I just can't do it. I can't do it. You know, I just can't. I've tried. I do the New Year's resolution thing. I buy the journal. I get the gym membership. It never happens. What I do, though, are a couple of different things. When I was younger and I was going back and forth to Baghdad all the time, and it was such a thrill, and it was so exciting, and it was so new, and I was learning so much, I used to write these emails to some of my friends and family on an almost daily basis. And they were quite detailed and really capturing the scene, the experiences, the smells, the interactions with people. And I realized, had it not been for those emails, I would have been in real trouble trying to write this book, because my memories from Syria onwards, so like the last 10 years, are very sharp, very vivid. Right. But going back to Baghdad, whatever that was now, 15 years ago, oof, that's a little tougher. And even Beijing and Moscow, I think Beijing was in some ways the hardest part to write, because it was like a transition period where I didn't have a diary, but I wasn't yet in such a kind of intense war zone environment that these memories are like seared into my brain.
Right. Yeah. And how long were you there the first time you went to Beijing?
Oh, I lived there for 2.5 years.
Right.
So the first time I went was right after college, and I went and I worked on Kill Bill, and I was
That's right.
And I was there for whatever it was. I guess it was like a month and a half or 2 months. I can't really remember. And it was absurd, because I was on a movie set the whole time, and I was kind of miserable, because I was like, okay, it's very cool that I'm surrounded by celebrities, and I can see that this is the best summer job ever. Yet I'm in China, and I'm on a film set all day that's designed to look like Japan, and I'm not getting my China experience. And
right.
I think that really cemented for me a decision that I'd already made before, which was that my passion is in journalism and storytelling and connecting with people and being out there in the real world, making these connections. Movies are awesome and they're cool and they're creative and they're super, I'm not trashing them in any way,
right,
but they're artificial, right? It's a recreation of a reality. And I found that, like, ultimately I found it really tedious.
right. That certainly wasn't for you. Absolutely not. Actually, when I read that part about you being a stand-in for Uma Thurman, I was not expecting that in the book at all. So when it happened, I was like, what? That was quite interesting. Now, you've made an incredible impact on the world of journalism and touched the lives of so many of your viewers. So you mentioned it briefly, but how did you know then that you wanted to become a war correspondent? And do you remember that moment? Was that it in Beijing?
No, it was before then. It was actually when I was in college. I had thought I wanted to be an actress. And the first week of my senior year, I was studying comparative literature, French, Italian, and Russian literature. I was always into languages and I was always into storytelling. So
Your grandmother spoke many languages, correct?
My grandmother was a linguist, yeah. And also a pianist, which sadly I am not. But 9/11 happened, and it was just, I think for so many Americans, so many people around the world in general, it just was one of those moments that, like, your whole life is suddenly upside down. What you thought you understood about the world no longer applies. What you thought you understood about America's role in the world no longer applies. And I just became consumed with this idea that I wanted to travel to the ends of the earth to understand how this had happened and why this had happened and who had perpetrated it and where the hatred came from and where the misunderstanding came from and where the miscommunication came from as well, because I had this sense that, like, there was a real communication problem that was underpinning a lot of this, and not so much on the geopolitical level, but on just at a basic human level.
Yes.
So that was the moment that changed everything. And suddenly I was like, okay, I don't want to be an actress. And I knew that it was going to be war that I was going to be covering just because of the nature of 9/11 and the response and the invasion of Afghanistan and then later the invasion of Iraq. I knew that's where I wanted to be. And those were the people I wanted to be connecting with and understanding better. And so, yeah, that's what started it all. And it hasn't changed that much for me. The stories have changed. The nature of the world has changed. But this fundamental desire to act as a communicator of sorts and to connect with people outside of my world, that is still a huge part of the motivation.
Yeah, I can see that. And we're going to get into that a little bit. I have so many questions for you on the people that you've connected with. Let's fast forward a little bit in the book to you started as a producer, right? But I want to know about that first time you went on air live. Were you 26 or 27? And I believe it was your friend Jonathan it Jonathan that surprised you and put you on air, and you were working for Fox News.
Oh, well, he surprised me because I was working as a producer. I was freelancing, working with him for Fox News, and we were in Beirut. It was the war between Lebanon and, well, Hezbollah really and Israel. And we went to interview the Lebanese president. And I was trying to put together a clip reel at the time, which is sort of like clips you put together of yourself, and then you show them to your bosses and say, look, I could be good on TV, put me on TV. And so Jonathan interviews Emil Lahoud, who was then the president of Lebanon. And then at the end, without even warning me, he goes, and now my producer would like to interview you briefly for our digital component. And Lahoud understandably looked a little bit like, wait a second, this wasn't part of the deal. And so I went and sat in the chair and had to interview the president of Lebanon for 5 minutes, just a couple of questions. But still, I was like, I said to him afterwards, I'm like, Jonathan, I cannot believe you just dropped that on me.
Yeah.
But it worked because I put that in the clip reel along with some stand-ups or pieces to camera that I had done around the devastation in Lebanon. And I showed it to my boss, and he said, fine, you can go to Baghdad as a reporter for the first time, but you have to go for New Year's Eve, Christmas, and Thanksgiving. So it was like triple holidays that I had to go to Baghdad. But of course, I was like, absolutely, sign me up. And off I went. And within a few days, Saddam Hussein was executed.
That's
and
right.
because it was the holiday season, no one else could get there quickly. And so I literally spent 36 hours in a live shot position on television all the time. And yeah, it's like baptism by fire. You really learn in those moments, and you make mistakes and you embarrass yourself. But I'm very fortunate that I came of age before Twitter.
I remember reading that in the book, actually. It's very true. Thank goodness for that, right?
So it's okay. I was allowed to make my mistakes and people forgot about them and they're not on the internet. So
that's okay. We're all allowed to make mistakes. Absolutely.
yeah.
I mean, and look, my goodness, look what you were doing at that time. I remember watching you at that time. Like, it's just
Yeah, that was a
wonderful career.
It was a strange and crazy time, and it was a really intense education for a young journalist being in Baghdad and everything that was going on, but it was an extraordinary education as well.
Yeah. Now, you know, we have so much access to information, speaking of Twitter and social media, but nothing can really replace the firsthand connection, right? That account of the human story, which you speak about. And you're known for your empathy and, you know, how you are able to bring that connection to the viewers and to life, really, and tell some of the toughest news stories out there in such a compelling way. And, you know, I want to spend a few moments just focus on this. Like, you're almost poetic at times when you speak of the individuals that you've encountered on this journey of yours. You know, thinking about, and this is like not the, you know, the leaders of the rebel or the war, you know, what's happening, the leaders of the countries, the presidents, but it's some of the people that you connected with, like Volodya, your driver from ABC in Russia. And you talk about the story of taking him and his daughter to the fast food restaurant.
Yeah, we took him to the circus, and then we went afterwards to a restaurant called Yolki Polki, which is a Russian chain. You know, it's like a Denny's or something. But when we went to the restaurant, his granddaughter had never been to a restaurant before, because, you know, they didn't have a lot of money, and that wasn't something they were willing to spend money on. And
right.
You know, these are the moments, honestly, and these interactions and these friendships that really inform how you understand a people or a place or a culture or a conflict. And they give you empathy, they give you compassion, they give you a feeling of connection, of shared humanity. And so much of what is missing from the conversation when you look at just the straight news or you look at politics and geopolitics, and it's all about strategy and what's the best way, and there's no humanity in it, there's no compassion in it, there's no connection in it. And indeed, if you even sort of suggest that, or put forward that maybe it would be a good idea to have an injection of that into the debate, people look at you like you're crazy or like you're naive or like you're a little girl, which is something that I've always found very frustrating. And I definitely think it's a product of the fact that there aren't many women in positions of power and in a lot of these countries and making a lot of these decisions. So I'm hopeful that that will change a bit. But again, like, this is what motivates me. This is why I wrote the book. This is why I want people to read it, because I don't want you just to think Russia, Vladimir Putin, you know, Crimea, geopolitics, Syria, like all of that's important too. And you should know that and you should be engaged with that. But also learning about Volodya and loving Volodya the way that I do or did. Sadly, he passed away, but that's an important part of understanding Russia too.
Absolutely. And there are so many of them. I don't even want to give them away.
Yeah.
There's so many of them. There's, you know, your Arabic teachers, Hakim, and then you had a woman Arabic teacher as well at one point. And Baulash, and your teacher in Beijing. I mean, I don't want to give it all away, because if people haven't read the book, I really want them to read it and get firsthand. But that connection, it truly did help. For me, it did help, you know, understand what was happening in the moment and what you were reporting on, having that other piece of history and, you know, and what was happening at that time.
I hope so, because I think you have to make people care a bit. Otherwise, it's a little bit abstract. It's not, particularly when we talk about Americans, it's like Americans don't care about foreign news. They don't care about the rest of the world. And it's like, that's not true. That's not true. You just have to make it accessible to them, make it relevant to them, make it something they can connect with, make it something that resonates with them. Americans are very open-hearted, and they're very interested in other people's stories. Maybe they don't want to read, a long article about geopolitics, many of them, but like, that's, I just think it's lazy to assume that people don't care about these issues. You've got to find ways to hook them in and a way for them to get in the door.
Yeah, well, you certainly do that very well. Now, you recently, just in, I believe it was December, also interviewed Alexei Navalny, who, we know that story. And that was probably a pretty important time in your career as of recent. Is there is there one moment that you felt was a really difficult assignment, and why?
Well, listen, you're talking about the Navalny interview, so let's start there. The interview itself was fascinating. He's Russia's opposition leader. They tried to kill him with Novichok. He's now been imprisoned. But as part of the broader investigation, we went back to Russia. We were working with this investigative outlet, Bellingcat, and trying to get to the bottom of who was responsible for poisoning him. And we realized that it was a team of kind of FSB operatives, which is Russia State Security Services. Many of them had expertise in chemical weapons and toxins and chemical warfare. And we tracked down some of their addresses, and we actually went to the door, to the apartment of one of these operatives, and knocked on the door and said, was it your team that poisoned Navalny? That's obviously, I've done some dangerous and difficult and challenging things in my career. This was, it was a little frightening. Not in the sense that I thought the guy was going to kill me, or that the Russians were going to, or anything dramatic like that. But it's still always scary to go and out an FSB operative on television. I actually don't know that it's really been done before. And it's also just difficult to knock on someone's door. Doorstepping is always hard, right? Because there is some like inner British person inside me that's like, oh, this is so rude. This is terribly polite. I'm knocking on this man's door at 7 a.m. Like, what must he think? This is awful. He's in his pajamas. And so it's like a combination of things where you're like, and then there's the pressure of knowing I have to get this right. I have one shot at this. The camera's rolling. I can't do multiple takes. It's not like a normal piece to camera. I've got one shot to get it right. So that was a recent example of a really challenging television story moment.
Yeah, I'm sure you have many of them. And like you say, that's just one example. I've also read an article where you wrote about good and evil, and they both for sure exist, and kind of balancing those. What examples of human resilience and kindness have you witnessed in the midst of all of the tragedy and the reporting on some of the evil that's happening, I guess?
I'm really glad you asked that, because, as a war correspondent, you see the best of humanity and the worst of humanity. And often we talk about the worst of humanity. We don't really talk about the best of humanity. But it's important. It's what enables you to keep doing this job. Otherwise, if you only saw the worst of humanity, you wouldn't be able to do it. It would be too torturous. I think when I think of resilience and generosity, I think a lot about the women, the mothers in Aleppo that I spent time with. Because, this, like being a mother at any time, in any circumstance, is really challenging. It's really hard. It's hard work. Being a mother in a war zone is a whole new level of hard work, because particularly when you're in fear of, death, destitution, that you won't be able to take care of your family, that you can't provide for them, that you can't ensure their security. It's petrifying. It's incredibly stressful. And not only that, you have to project this image all the time for your children's sake, that like things are okay.
Right.
And when I was in Aleppo with these women, I think they had sort of abandoned trying to pretend that things were okay, right? There were shells falling down all around us. The mornings began with fighter jets dropping bombs all around us. So it wasn't so much that they were trying to pretend that things were okay, but it was just seeing that still every morning they were able to get up, comb their daughter's hair, braid their daughter's hair, make some breakfast, and kind of put one foot in front of the other and be there and be a mother and just get through the day. Like that, to me, even though it's such a small thing, spoke to like reservoirs of strength and of resilience that frankly I think many of us could only fathom being able to summon up in the pits of such despair.
Truly, I mean, I can't even imagine. And to your point, it's just in Western culture, we have our challenges as being moms every day. But this is something so incredibly different and so incredibly like remarkable. I know you did a post yesterday on a photo from your time there. And this is a young journalist you posted about yesterday who...
So she's an extraordinary, a woman called Wa'ad al-Kitab. And she is, well, she basically was married to, well, she fell in love with a doctor and married a doctor and was in the hospital in Aleppo that was being bombed day in and day out, was pregnant and then gave birth to her daughter. And she's extraordinarily talented. She picked up a camera and just started to document the whole thing, being a mother, being a Syrian woman, being an activist, but also living in this hospital, witnessing untold horrors day in and day out. And she made this incredibly beautiful and powerful film called For Sama that was actually nominated for an Oscar last year.
I actually watched it last year after the nomination.
Yeah.
I found it very hard to get through it. It's
horrific, right? It is really challenging material in that sense because the horrors of what she saw, the fear, I mean, and as a mother with her baby, I mean, just wow. And yeah, that's why I posted the picture of Wad, because I'm like, to me, she symbolizes the strength, resilience, grace, determination, grit, love, generosity, and all of those things that I'm talking about when I try to pay homage to mothers in war zones.
Absolutely. And you do a lot of work, which I'm going to ask a question on that in a minute. But I just staying on that topic, when you're shuffling back and forth, you had written as well, you know, when I believe it was when you were accepting Grammys back in 2013, but you've written as well. Sorry?
Emmys.
Emmys, yes, Emmys. Not
right. I would love to have a career in music, but sadly that hasn't.
Right, a pianist you're not. That's right, Emmys. But you had talked about like the stress and the detachment and the guilt you feel. So when you come home, Clarissa, what is it like for you? And now that you are a mom, you actually, our viewers may or may not know, but you just had a baby 8 months ago, your second son during the pandemic. And there must be, I know you write about being pregnant with your first son in the book, but how do you figure that out when you come back from, you know,
I think having kids makes it a little bit easier in some ways, strangely, because the nature of your love for a child is such that, like, the minute you walk in the door, right, the minute you see them, and all the time you're just connected to them all the time. Whereas like the rest of your family, that's harder to navigate in some ways because connections can shift, and especially if you're totally immersed in a war zone and then you come home and you don't feel connected to your life at home. And that's something I have definitely struggled with in the past. What you realize and what you learn along the way, and you know, this is something that doesn't happen overnight, and it involves having a good therapist, which everyone who does this work should absolutely have, is that you can't do this job if you are not able to embrace the joy and the beauty and the privilege of your normal life, because you need to fill the tank when you come home for a month or 2 weeks or whatever, however long it is. You need to be able to like laugh with friends or dance or, you know, drink a beautiful glass of wine in a nice restaurant with your husband or go shopping with your mother. However silly, however trivial, see a play, go to an exhibition. You need that. That is what fills the tank. That's what gives you the power, the strength, the resources to go back out to the war zone or whatever natural disaster. It could be any story.
Right.
in some destitute and difficult place. If you don't, and if you're not able to embrace that, and sometimes it's hard, right? Because there's real guilt associated with it. Why did I get to leave Aleppo, where people are being pounded under the rubble every day, and I'm now sitting here with my family in the south of France drinking a glass of rosé? Like, this doesn't feel fair. This doesn't feel right. I don't belong here. I should be back there. I have guilt. There's a lot of baggage that comes with it. And it's really crucial that you work out how to kind of make peace with that, and how to take the most out of your normal life in order that you can give it back in your work life.
I love the filling the tank. That is really great. I like that a lot. You know, in back in chapter 5, you talk about misogyny. And so we're going to talk about that for a minute. Now, in chapter 5, I'm going to give a little spoiler for those that haven't. You are at a dinner party with, and at the dinner party in Russia is Saif Gaddafi, right? And he ignores you pretty much the entire dinner. Yeah. But then afterwards, when you're about to go to a nightclub, he tries to put his tongue down your throat, basically. Is how you describe it in the book. You know, so tell us about that moment, but also have we progressed? How much have we progressed? What do you see in your work now in terms of misogyny and even ageism in this line of work?
You know, it's so funny, when I wrote this book, that people were like, oh, you know, you should write a lot about the experience of being a woman. And I was like, yeah, I don't really think that's such a big thing for me, but okay. And then I like wrote the book and I'm like, oh, wait, it's a big thing for me. Like, there's a lot of that in there that I guess I hadn't necessarily processed at the time. You know, the irony is with Saif Gaddafi, we were at this dinner, there were 8 of us. He never looked at me. He never addressed me. He never acknowledged me. He never spoke to me. Nothing. He dealt with the men at the table. And then when we all were going afterwards to this nightclub, which, you know, sounds kind of bizarre, but in Russia, it's pretty normal. It's like what you do after dinner. He got into the car and he just turned towards me. He didn't say hello. He didn't say you're pretty. He didn't say it's been interesting talking to you. Nothing. He just went like, bleh. And I was like, what is happening? Like, what? I'm a journalist. You're crazy. Stop it. And what I realized, though, at the end of it, that upset me even more than being lunged on, which I actually thought was sort of amusing. I mean, irritating, but like what upset me more was being snubbed and ignored at the dinner. And like, that's a particularly extreme example, but I can't tell you how many times as a woman I have felt a little bit dismissed. Particularly in the company of like middle-aged white men, or a little bit like, oh, that's nice, Missy, that you went to a war zone, or that's nice that you were in Aleppo, but we're kind of talking geopolitics here, so, you know.
Right.
And that is frustrating. And it is always hard as a woman to know how to respond, because if you get chippy about it, then like you're aggressive, you're bitchy, you're pushy, or you have an issue, you have a chip on your shoulder. But if you accept it, then you're condoning it. So how do you find that right line to walk where you sort of gently asserting your authority, but in a way that's not threatening to the men at the table? I think I have almost worked out how to do that, but like, and I do think a lot of progress has been made on that front, no doubt. I mean, when I started out my career, I worked with a correspondent in Baghdad. When I was a producer, he used to call me sugar tits. Okay. Yeah, he was kind of joking, kind of.
Maybe not.
Yeah. And like, obviously that wouldn't stand anymore, and that's a good thing. But I still think we have a ways to go. I still think that misogyny is there. I think you only have to look at women on television and the way they look, the way they dress. On some channels, certainly a lot more than others. I would like to see a lot more women over the age of 50 on television news. I see quite a few men over the age of 50. I don't see as many women. They exist. I'm not saying it's like a blanket statement. I just would like to see more of them. I think I have like heard people make comments about this sort of bias against, like, you know, difficult middle-aged women or whatever. Yeah, because they know what they're talking about and they have
Exactly.
experience, and they're not going to take your crap. So,
Exactly.
let's have more of them on TV, please.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, it's good to hear that it is improving, but to your point, I mean, I know as well people have told you to stop, now that you're a mother, to stop traveling to conflict zones, where you feel you have
Yeah.
an opinion about that as well.
I do, because I just think it's like people always ask me, oh, I assume you're not going to go to war anymore. There's no, and I'm like, A, that's a big assumption. B, I'm wondering if you're asking my male colleague, who's a father of 3, if he's going to stop going to war. Pretty sure you're not. Now, I actually have male colleagues who did stop going to war when they became fathers. So this isn't a knock on my male colleagues who do this job and who are fathers or who have decided to, do different kinds of work. Yeah. But there is definitely, again, it's just like this pervasive, underlying low-level sexism that assumes that as a mother, you will have to make certain accommodations. And I don't want to pretend that things aren't different after you have kids and that it hasn't affected the way I see risk, the places I'm willing to go to. Of course it has.
Yes.
I'm just saying that those assumptions really should be made about any parent, regardless of whether they're a mother or a father.
Mm-hmm. Well, I'm sure as your boys grow up and get to know all about your career, they're going to be celebrating all this remarkable work and very proud of their mom. One day, of course. Now, one of our core commitments is to sustainability and doing what we can to protect the planet. And, climate change is real. It's happening. But, can you give us a perspective of what you see outside of all the talk in the Western world on, climate change and the push to make changes? I mean, I'm sure it's got to be a bit different there, but at the same time, they're probably impacted some of these smaller towns and communities and cities from flooding and drought. And maybe shed some light on that.
One of the biggest issues, one of the biggest contributors towards conflict, it's migration, right? And if you look at migration, I mean, obviously it's complex and there's many facets to it, but a lot of migration is related to climate change, and people are living in areas that are increasingly becoming uninhabitable. Right. The land is not arable. There are thousands of different reasons, but I think that migration is going to continue to change and shape the world that we live in today. Mm-hmm. And it's going to continue to be an incredibly polarizing and political issue that I think will continue to, unfortunately, generate conflict. So when we think about climate change, I think we have to get beyond this idea that, it's, a few polar bears in the Arctic who are out of luck, right? I mean, and I do think that broadly speaking, there is a deeper understanding now. We get that we're all affected by it. But I still think that people are only just beginning to grasp the idea that there are parts of the Middle East that literally will be too hot for humans to live there in several decades' time, right? And so what does that mean for all the people who live there now? Where do they go? Who takes them in? How does that work? What happens to that land? I mean, these are like potentially huge problems and issues that we're all going to be facing together as an international community. It's not just one country that's going to be affected by this.
Right.
It's all of us. So this is the one thing that drives me crazy, is that people sometimes think it doesn't really affect me. Like, I get that climate change is bad, but it doesn't really affect me. Yes, it does. Yes, it does. It affects you now, even if you don't see it. And it's definitely going to be affecting you and everyone in the future in very real, very present, and potentially very dangerous ways.
Yeah.
Not just about, rising sea levels, which obviously have like hugely frightening implications, but also about this mass movement of people who are potentially unable, or already in some cases unable, to live in certain parts of the world. And we should be paying attention, and we should care, and we should be actively engaging on these issues.
Wow, thank you for saying that and giving us that insight. it makes me, want to just do more, than what I'm doing as much as I can every day. That's for
Well,
sure.
and one thing I want to say there, because I talk to people a lot about this, and I know I feel this way too. So easy to feel like the problems are so huge. I'm completely overwhelmed. What can I do? Right. And I know that people feel that way. And I think it was Ruth Bader Ginsburg who was just like, and I'm paraphrasing her, not at all in her words, but she was like, don't try to tackle the problem as a whole.
Right.
You just do your small step every day, your small thing, and it matters and it counts.
Yeah.
And if everybody is just taking that attitude of like, this is my small contribution I make, or this is my commitment to engage with this issue, or this is my commitment to educate myself about this, or educate others about this, or support others who are doing good work in this field. Whatever it is, and however small it is, it matters, it's valuable. Look at how crowdsourcing works. Like, we understand that this is kind of the future. It's like harnessing the energy of the masses.
Yes.
With everybody just contributing a tiny bit at a time. So don't ever feel that what you're doing doesn't matter. And this is something I try to remind myself of a lot as well, because I go out and tell these stories and then I'm like, but who cares, and who's changing their mind, and I haven't ended the Syrian civil war, and I haven't, I don't have anything tangible to show for this. And then I'll get a note from one viewer or one person being like, I really was moved by that, or that made me think that I wanted to support a charity, and or whatever it might be. And I'm like, that's it.
That's it.
That's all I have to do. That's my job. That's my role. That's my way to contribute.
Yeah, well, I say that all the time, but certainly on this show, we just say every episode, just every small little thing can make such big impact, right? It can lead to such big impact. So thank you for sharing that as well. And I also love that you then as well put it into perspective of the work that you do, because it's true, something could touch someone's life in a way, and the way you report and the way you do your journalism, I think is different. And I love how you bring human kindness and the human element into everything you do. Tell us about you're an ambassador for Women for Women. Tell us about that organization a little bit, because I think our viewers would like to know about that and why you became an ambassador.
So they're awesome. And I'm assuming that a lot of people watching today will be women. I mean, not all of them necessarily, but I'm sure there's quite a few. So I was always wondering, like, as a woman, how can I support women in war zone, right? Because I know that a lot of the money that, okay, there's basic aid, like get them food, get them shelter. And I'm like, yeah, I'm kind of interested in taking this to the next level. How do I give them, or how do you help give them self-esteem, confidence, skills to be a bit more independent, to make money, to look after their families, potentially, if they're put in a situation where they're widows or whatever it might be. And so Women for Women does exactly that. It starts out with something small, but I find like very moving, which is letter writing. So you are basically given a sister in a different country, and you write her letters, and she writes you letters back, and you form a connection. And that's the beginning, right? It's like forming a connection with someone outside your orbit, outside your bubble, outside your world. And you quickly find that you inspire each other. And then a lot of the other work they do, the primary work they do, is about forming these kind of circles of women and empowering them through trainings, workshops, again, like giving them skills, apprenticeships, helping them set up their own businesses. Like, it can be any number of different things. Because I am so frustrated always when I go to these difficult and dangerous places and I see these extraordinary women, some of whom we've already kind of been talking about, and they don't have anyone supporting them. They don't have anyone rooting for them. They don't have anyone helping them to improve themselves. And so many of them want that. And they're desperate for those opportunities, and they want to work, and they want to contribute, and they want to have a bit more independence. So I love that. And I'm proud to support it in whatever small way I can.
Yeah, that's wonderful, and we're going to support that organization as well as to thank you for being on the show. I want to make sure that we give a donation, and also to Anara. Is Anara did I say that correctly? Yeah. So tell us a little bit about Anara.
That's another one of my favorites. Partly because it's run by my sister at CNN, Arwa Damon, who is also an incredible conflict reporter, much braver than I am. And she basically started this charity because she kept coming across children with all sorts of, sorry, my goodness. The lighting rig has decided it's had enough.
That's what happens. We're live.
This is life. Life under COVID. So he was coming across all these children with horrendous medical situations based on like trauma injuries they had incurred in conflict zones. And she wanted to put them together with really good quality medical care. And so she established this charity. And, what I love with Arwa's charity, I mean, many things about it. It's changing the lives of children, which I'm super passionate about. And also it's like, there's no fat, there's no fluff, there's no overhead. This is Arwa Damon. Okay. She does not mess around. Like every penny is going to these kids. And, their overheads are minimal. And she's an extraordinary woman. And I've seen the way she's changing children's lives. And it's like, honestly, I can't like get through one of her videos or newsletters without crying, because like, what a beautiful thing to be able to give a kid their face back, or a prosthetic arm, or like you're giving them a life. And so I'm a big fan of Inara.
Yeah, I did actually do some research and go on their website as well, and it's quite remarkable the work that's being done. So we'll of course support that charity as well as a gift of gratitude. I want to be really mindful of your time. You're a super busy lady with a lot going on. But I could talk to you for hours and hours and hours, Clarissa. Maybe one day we can sit and have a whiskey together. And
I'm ready.
Wouldn't that be nice?
What time is it? 5 yet?
Yeah, exactly. But I have to say, I might have to have your mom come and join us.
Oh, yes. I mean, you will not regret that. I mean, that's the real reason people should get the book. It's like, there's a lot of, but it's really all about my crazy mother. And she's a riot. So, yeah.
She seems like it for sure. I have a lot of favorite spots in London when I go there a lot on business travel, or pre-COVID anyway. So
well, hopefully you'll be able to come back at some point in the not too distant future, and you'll have to let me take you out.
I would love that. I will take you up on that for sure. That'd be wonderful. So what's next for you? What do you want to accomplish in this year alone? Because I'm sure you have a big, a lot of goals in mind, but what's in the immediate?
In the immediate, I'm really into investigative journalism at the moment. I am very frightened by the sort of barrage of misinformation and disinformation being pumped out there every day by actors around the world and at home in the US, state and non-state actors. And so I think it's a really important time to hold people accountable, to call them out on being a part of that. And so investigative journalism is kicking my ass. It's like really hard. You can spend months working on a story and then hit a brick wall or a dead end. But for me, it's also extremely exciting. And I love to feel like I'm building a new muscle and learning new skills and learning more about how you can sort of harness the power of technology to help hold people in power accountable for their actions.
Yes.
So I've got a couple on the boil at the moment. They're driving me crazy. It's been like months and months. I haven't hit any dead ends just yet, but like I can see a few in the distance. So I'm like desperately hoping to get a new lead. And my goal is to really get them off the ground and hopefully powerful reporting come out as a result.
Is that harder to do from home?
Oh, it's a nightmare. Travel anywhere. Also, I'm in the UK and I have a British passport. So
right.
Like,
no one's going to let you in.
We're the pariahs of the world right now. The French, no, you can't come. The Russians, no, you can't come. I'm like, okay, well, there goes that investigation. I mean,
We'll have to try and get you a Canadian passport. We're pretty much welcomed everywhere.
I know. I married a German, and I thought maybe I could get a German passport, but then it turns out you got to live in Germany for like 8 years. I'm like, okay, that's not going to happen right away. So
yeah, and we both married Phillips.
we did. We did.
So let's do something really fun before we stop for the day, and just do a quick this or that, if you don't mind, just for fun.
Okay.
Not that we haven't had fun during this time,
Right.
Of course. Let's end it on another fun note. Okay, so are you a phone or text message woman?
Text.
Do you mostly text in the way you communicate, like in the field?
When people call me, I'm like, unless we booked a call, why are you calling? Text. Well, send me a WhatsApp. I'll write back to you right away. It's not that I don't want to communicate with you. It's just that phone calls need to be booked unless you're a delivery man.
Right. It's like that's a meeting, right?
Yeah, it's a meeting. And also my day is back to back Zooms and phones, and as yours is too. So like my mother is always doing that. She's always like just calling me. I'm like, this is not allowed.
I got my mother out of that, actually. She said the best gift my dad ever gave her one year for Christmas was an iPhone and her using WhatsApp. And
That's what I did. I got my mother into WhatsApp, and it's been a game changer. Before it was the landline. I'm like, you're the only person who has the landline number, and I'm going to rip it out of the wall if you don't stop calling it. Okay.
Oh my gosh, you make me laugh. Okay, this might be hard for you. London or New York?
Oh. It's probably got to be London, just because I really have spent most of my life here now. And also, I know I'm getting old, because when I go to New York, I'm like, but it's so dirty. I'm like, but it's so noisy. I love New York, but I think it was more for my 20s.
Right. Yes. Have you ever been to Toronto?
I have not. I would love to go to Toronto. I've only been to like Montreal once. It's embarrassing. I need to do some more Canada time.
Well, if you come here, then it'd be my pleasure to take you out somewhere.
Thank you.
Okay, hard copy book or tablet?
Oh, hard copy. Yeah. I'll do tablets in a pinch,
right.
But no, hard copy.
Yeah.
Can't get into the tablets. No,
me either. Okay, dancing or singing?
Dancing. Love dancing. Love
it. I think there's something. There was a point in the book. No, was it in the book?
Yes, in Beirut, and it was like in the middle of the war, and we went to this nightclub, and all these Lebanese people were dancing, and I was like, you guys are insane, there's a war. And then by the end of the night, I was dancing too, because we realized that like there is something like therapeutic about it almost.
Yeah, there is though, right? I mean,
yeah, that's good therapy. That honestly, people are like, what do you miss about lockdown? I'm like, I don't miss parties, but I miss dancing.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I'm like, I'm like a mother or two. I'm not going out on ragers a lot.
Right.
But, the few times a year where you do go out and dance, it's like, man, that was good.
So good.
It felt really good. I felt like I got something out of my system.
Absolutely. Absolutely. You'll have to have a dance party in your house.
I know. I need to take up Zumba or something.
I was going to say, we should do like a Zoom dance party. We can dance crazy together. So if we were to have that, or I'm going to rephrase that and say, when we have that drink together, are we drinking whiskey or wine?
It really depends on what mood you get me in.
You drink a lot of whiskey in the field.
If I'm if I'm on the road or on a big story, it's going to be whiskey, because I can't drink a lot, right? Because it's like, I can't get drunk.
Right.
But at the end of like a really long day, I'm not going to drink a bottle of wine. It takes too long. But like,
right.
A double whiskey with like 1 or 2 cubes of ice, that is a nice way to celebrate with your colleagues before bed in a timely but effective manner.
Absolutely. I can see that. And you also share some of that in your book. So Clarissa, I am just so honored, and I feel so blessed, honestly, to have had this time with you. It's just wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
And thank you for doing all that you're doing, for, reporting on tough stuff and just giving us also the behind the scenes. Keep telling your stories. I hope you'll write another book. I hope I have still so many questions I haven't even got to on like the second half of the book. So, you know, I hope we can do this again sometime, but really thank you from the bottom of my heart. I so appreciate this time together, and I'm sure our viewers also agree. And thank you for letting me have this intimate conversation with you. I appreciate it.
Thank you guys so much. I've really enjoyed it. And yes, keep doing what you're doing. I look forward to watching other ones.
Thank you.
Take care.
Take care.
Bye.
Have a nice evening. Bye-bye.